we are going to be diving into the Torah portion, Chayei Sara, and talking about the soul trait of equanimity. And we have some really interesting texts and reflections that are available to us as part of our Torah study. But before we do that, let's start with saying our blessing over immersing ourselves in Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah Hafok ba la'asok b'divrei Torah Yedadai-dai-dai-dai-dai 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 Yedadai-dai-dai-dai. Okay, so now that we've said our blessing over Torah, we're going to be able to dive in. Actually, I have a couple of quick things just to say before we open up our text sheet. One is obviously today we're not doing a multi-access. That's in part because I'm on a CCAR convention planning committee, and the meeting is from 12 until 1 o'clock. And so I knew that I had to leave it halfway through, as I have been doing for the past several months, but I knew I wouldn't be able to greet people as they came in. And I hate the idea of people coming in and not being able to greet everyone. So I chose to keep this on Zoom today. But next week, if there are people who are fully vaccinated who would like to come to the temple, we'll meet in the Taos room. And if you would like to meet online, you're more than welcome to do that. So it'll be a multi-access Torah study. Sound good? Okay, great. So I am going to share the screen. And essentially all of these Torah portions in Genesis have a ton of material in them. For anyone who was in the Taos lecture that Jim Sneer did just this past Sunday, he talked about all the different Torah portions and how some of them are much longer than others. These Torah portions, in addition to just having story after story because it's Genesis, also were some of the longest Torah portions of our year. And so today, we're not diving into any one particular story, but rather talking about overall the arc of people's lives within the Torah, as you saw in the Musar commentary that Jennifer Gubitz, who I was in seminary with, that she put together. All right, so I started here just kind of with an outline of everything that happens in Chayei Sara. Some of the things that Rabbi Gubitz spoke about were things that actually occurred in last week's Torah portion, because it's really talking about the arc of Isaac's life. And some happen even in next week's Torah portion. But here, what's fascinating is that Chayei Sara, which means the life of Sarah, it begins with Sarah's death. That's the very beginning of it, is talking about Sarah dying and Abraham negotiating to purchase a plot of land in which to bury her. Abraham asks his servant to find a wife for Isaac, his son. The servant meets a generous, beautiful woman named Rebecca, who agrees to marry Isaac sight unseen. And Rebecca and Isaac meet, they get married. Rebecca moves into Sarah's tent, and I know the wording there is interesting. The Torah puts it exactly like that. And so there's a lot of interesting commentaries on what that means. Abraham marries Keturah, his second wife, and there's a discussion of his descendants, both through Hagar, through Keturah, through Sarah. And then at the very end, Abraham dies, and Isaac and Ishmael bury him together. So there's a lot that goes on in this portion, obviously. So what I'd love to do is just kind of start with this piece that Rabbi Gubitz put out about this week's soul trait of equanimity. Would anyone like to read it from In Tracing Isaac's Life?
I can.
All right.
Thank you, Ray.
In tracing Isaac's life through Genesis, from the Akedah to the moment when Rebecca alights from her camel, literally falling in love with him, until this dying breath at the end of Genesis 35. Sorry, I had the timer on. We wonder, how does Isaac endure a life that vacillates between joy and deep pain, comfort and trauma, loss and love? We might ask if and how he is able to remain equanimity during his soul-stirring life journey. What can we moderns learn from his life as we face the highs and lows of being human? And what are the ways the Musar value of equanimity can sustain us as well?
Okay, thank you. Let's pause right there because those are really big questions to start with, right? That Isaac goes through so much in his life, and she talks about just a few of those. Falling in love. Sorry, I muted myself. I apologize. There's so much that is going on within Isaac's life, from the Akedah, where his father nearly sacrifices him, to his mother dying, to falling in love, to becoming a parent in his own right, and creating a family for the future. There's so much that he goes through. And so what do you make of this question about how he's able to maintain equanimity, or menuchat hanefesh, which literally means rest of the soul? Anyone have any thoughts on the questions that Rabbi Gubitz poses?
Well, we're always taught to not read ahead, but we sort of did when we did our homework here and reading our chapter. So the guesses are that he took some time. In our day, we would study Torah, we would do some meditation, we would walk and commune with nature, we would do some appropriate things. Hopefully we wouldn't do inappropriate things like sedate ourselves with overeating or alcohol or something that's negative. But I just have to presume how he managed this tough time was he did some positive things. But that's just from reading ahead, which I know we're not supposed to do.
Well, the homework was to read ahead.
Yeah, I have another reading. Often Isaac is considered, when compared to Abraham or Jacob, that he's boring, he's slow. What does he really accomplish in life? I'm just giving the other's viewpoint. He makes a mistake with his two sons, Esau and Jacob. So he appears out of it. That's a negative viewpoint. I've heard that viewpoint.
So what you're saying is you don't buy this, that he actually is able to maintain equanimity, that there's ways in which that doesn't seem to be the case.
I buy it because there's another interpretation that says that Isaac was the great peacemaker. He made peace between his tribe and other tribes. There weren't Jews at that time, but he made peace between them. He redug his father's wells. He was an ecologist. His father's wells for them had silted up. He redug them and shared them with his neighbors, even from a different tribes, a different religion in a sense. So in a lot of ways, he is a peacemaker. He is an ecologist. He is really somebody very significant. He may not be dramatic like his father or like one of his sons, but there are people who say that he's kind of sleepy. Well, I like the other viewpoint better.
People are complicated. So there's complexities to it, is what you're saying. Jessica, did you want to say something?
Yes, but now I see that I'm off base. That you're asking about, this asks about Isaac, yes?
Yes, but bring in anything you'd like to.
Well, I thought it was asking about Abraham. And I was going to say that what may have helped Abraham is the fact that God came to him and said, hey, everything's going to be fine. You're going to end up fathering a great nation. And And that maybe comforted him in times of trouble. But I have to think about Isaac. As far as I'm concerned, he should have had PTSD after the incident.
Right,
on
and
the
maybe he
mountain.
did. Maybe he did, right? I mean, that's getting back to a little bit of what Larry was saying, is that he wasn't quite the same after that incident. I don't know how any human being could be.
Right. He's such an interesting person. That the word that came to me today is he must have been meditative. I think of one of the things that allows you to restore equanimity is to take the time and give yourself, to love yourself, to say it's okay, you didn't cause this. Life can go on. We're going to get past it. We cannot erase it because we can't erase anything that happens. And that Isaac chooses to take the high road, as it were. He could have chosen to be extremely angry at his father, but literally he walked away. He did not come back with his father. No.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so we're going to look at that a bit more when we start talking. There's one piece that she brings in, of course, about the Akedah and how he responds. And truthfully, there could be several Torah studies based on that because there's so much commentary. I didn't bring all that in because I had enough stuff that I was bringing in here, and I knew I wasn't going to get through the stuff that I did put in. But there's really wonderful conversations to be had about everything that you're bringing up, Rabbi Catherine.
I always think of this,
Yeah, go ahead.
I always think of this Torah portion as enter Rebecca, who is quite someone in her own right, but that's not what we're talking about today.
Yeah, Rebecca is quite a character for sure. So I want to just bring in the second paragraph in what Rabbi Gubitz wrote here, that Musar scholars describe the midah, or the soul trait, of equanimity with various Hebrew terms. Menuchat hanefesh, which is calmness of the soul. Menucha means to rest, as you might remember. Yeshuv hadat, which means a settled mind. Or shalva, which means serenity. It's a state of being through which a person can face, a state of being through what a person can face any situation from turmoil to tranquility without being moved from the centered self. Like a surfer in the ocean, no matter how destabilizing waves splashing and smashing down around us, one with attuned equanimity is anchored by a stable inner core. When I was reading through this portion and this commentary, I just thought about the storm that we've been kind of going through over the past 20 months and the ways in which we've been trying to attune ourselves perhaps to that stable inner core, and at sometimes maybe being more successful than at other moments. I know that's been the case for me. But along the same route, I want to bring in something that Alan Marinas wrote also about the definition of this particular soul trait. So he said, Jewish sources use several terms to name the soul trait of undisturbed equanimity, the most descriptive of which is menuchat hanefesh, calmness of the soul. The Musar teachers see the importance of a calm soul, but they don't see that inner state as a final station called peace and tranquility, where the journey ends, even as life continues. Instead, they view equanimity as an inner balance that coexists with the world, an experience that accepts turbulence and even turmoil, because that's just the way life is. In the Jewish view, the goal of spiritual life is not to reach an enlightened state in which all the questions and conundrums of life are unknotted with finality, but rather to become much more skilled at the process of living. The view applies fully to the soul trait of equanimity, which does not spell the end of our struggles, rather is an inner quality we can cultivate to equip ourselves to handle the inevitable ups and downs of life. So I wonder what you make of this, right? That when there's so much going on in our life, I know I've had so many conversations with people in the community about wanting to just not have so much turmoil outside. If only the pandemic was over. If only I was able to get this job. If only, there's so many if onlys, right? These outside forces. And I wonder kind of how this feels, what Alan Marinas is saying, that it's not about those if onlys. The world is never going to be perfect. The world is never going to be calm. Wanting that and going for that is just not realistic. But instead, it's about trying to find equanimity within ourselves. I wonder what kind of resonance that may or may not have with everyone.
I can give an example of my own life that describes that kind of feeling. You're in traffic and there's someone tailgating you. And then you start talking to yourself or to this person or this little thing on your shoulder or whatever you can imagine, and you're arguing with this person who's behind you. And it keeps you in this tense situation until it's resolved. You can either have them pass or, do something, pull over, but it can get really bad before it gets worse. And if you try and try to figure out a way to stop talking to yourself or to this imaginary, it's not an imaginary person, but a person in imaginary conversation, you can settle a bit. And it's a practice, not unlike what we're talking about here. You just have to take yourself out of this immediate situation mentally and restore your blood pressure and your heart rate.
Irv, I agree with you. I've been trying that lately, and it's wonderful. It's peaceful. It's delightful. I always used to be so involved with traffic and stuff, but the last couple of weeks, I've just been relaxing, and it's enjoyable.
Rabbi,
So, yeah,
I'm
sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, I was just going to say, I think for me, your example of, during these many months of COVID, having the necessity of, in our lives, in my life, of trying the best for disease prevention and, staying away from people and certainly going and, not eating inside restaurants, doing all the things that Sandy and I have tried to do, wearing masks, everything so that we could live our lives, yet just not have the social part of it with other people, and yet so it has been difficult because COVID's not over and it's just less, but it's been a very interesting time for us to get on with it, yet restrain at the same time from it's never really had to do that in my 77 years, but anyway, here we are.
I think also it speaks to us, this whole passage here, about something that we're being taught today, to be in the moment and enjoy what we can and learn to deal. Life doesn't necessarily get easier. Things go up and down, right? And so learn to handle it in the best way we can, while doing self-care, taking time out, pausing, taking a walk, or doing your artwork, or whatever gives you pleasure, and then being able to handle, life's adversity, which we all need to deal with. So I think self-care, it's telling us to also pause and reflect and take time take time for ourselves as well, then we can deal with that. It's not that things get easier, it's how we deal with it that's important.
That's
Yeah, well
beautifully
said.
said. Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
I want to go back for just a second to Irv and Larry, what you were saying about driving. And I wonder in those moments, right, where there's a lot of angst because someone is tailgating you or something like that, right? What do you do within yourself to be able to relax? What is that process like?
Well, for me is that, I try to realize what's happening. I said, I stop and think a minute, wait a minute, I'm arguing with somebody that's not even here, I can't talk to them. I can only send them a little message by tapping on my brakes or turning on my directional signals. But you can't ignore it because it's potentially a serious thing. So, but my train of, this is a long issue, you go by years and years. I tend to okay, I've got to resolve this. I can't sit here and fight with somebody I can't fight with, but I have to do something to resolve it. Sometimes it's a simple action. Sometimes it takes drastic action.
Mm-hmm.
Actually pull off, but
right.
That usually resolves it. But,
right.
So one trick I use, and Michael was talking about this long extended things that we give you. I said, I compare this to some things that happened in my lifetime that were far worse. They may have been shorter in duration, but it was something really, traumatic, and it upset me and my family. And I've had very few of those in my lifetime, but I'm sure all of us have. But then I said, okay, this is not as bad as that. So I can do something about this. I still have my flat screen. I still have my PC, and Catherine says we'll never get divorced. Murder's still on the table, but we'll never get divorced. So, it's not the worst thing that ever happened to me. So but anyway, back to the driving thing, maybe Larry can relate to that.
I'll add something. It's just, you suddenly stop and say, why am I bothering? And it all disappears. It's just that quick. It all disappears. I haven't gone as far as Irv comparing it to tragedies in life, but just suddenly not caring about it is easy, and it disappears, and everything becomes peaceful and enjoyable.
Okay, so it seems like it's about seeing the big picture, that sometimes we can be so overwhelmed in the moment of emotions, but that's not ultimately helpful. And by stepping back and seeing something bigger, perhaps there's a better way to respond in that moment, right? And I think that's a lot of what some of our sages are talking to here. There's a few quotes that I kind of brought together on this theme. So Bertrand Russell said, man's greatest triumph is to achieve stability and inner repose in a world of shifting threats and terrifying change, to try to find that stability. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who died just last year, said, the Jewish approach to life considers the person who has stopped going, one who has a feeling of completion, of peace, of a great light from above that has brought them to rest, to be someone who has lost their way. So now we're talking about the other direction, right? And this is getting back to Alan Marinas and his comment about really just finding middle roads, that you can go too far in either direction, just like with all of the other midot. To be someone who has lost their way. So if you are totally calm, totally relaxed in all situations, there's not something that's so good with that either, right? Only one whom the light continues to beckon, for whom the light is as distant as ever, only they can be considered to have received some sort of response. And Yisrael Salanter says something very similar to Adin Steinsaltz. As long as one lives a life of calmness and tranquility in the service of God, it is clear that he is remote from true service. We don't want true tranquility. That's not a true goal, right? We're never going to get there. It's kind of like who was it? I'm forgetting. There's one writer who I read a while back who was talking about her process in writing and says that she always gets all of these people who reach out to her and say, where do you work and what is your setup so that you can concentrate on writing? And her response was, if you need a perfect setup in order to be able to concentrate on writing, you will never write anything because it's not realistic. Like, you need to be able to find a way within yourself to be able to focus in different places. And the same is being said here. Don't wait for things to be perfect. To be able to have calmness within yourself, learn to find that calmness within yourself, even when there's raging storms outside. Easier said than done, right?
There's a Chinese saying that a learning man is alive and a learned man is dead.
Yeah, we're always growing.
It's like moving along, things are changing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's kind of stands because, like, very often people say, oh, I've been alive for too long. I can't possibly change anything at this point. It's like, no, that's not true. That's not true at all. Like, we're all in the process of working on ourselves, you know? There's never an ending point. So I love that. Any other thoughts here before I bring in a little bit more from this Torah commentary? Shelley, I've been seeing lots of like nods, and I'm wondering if there's something that you want to bring in. If not, that's totally okay. You can pass. You're muted though, so we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Let me see.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. It just reminds me of this Facebook passage that a friend sent to my husband this morning, and it was about a Buddhist as a Jew, Buddhist sayings as a Jewish person. And it was going for, I wish I had it in front of me because it's so funny. It was talking about complete peace and tranquility, and then the Jewish response to that. And it went through, and it was wonderful because it just reminded me of what I love most about Judaism, which is the humanity of it. And it wasn't about coming to this perfect place of peace and whatever. But I read a book recently by a man named Brinkman. He's a Norwegian author, and he wrote this book called Standing Firm. And he's not religious at all, but one of the religions that he does pick out is Judaism as being a wonderful example of people. He's against the self-help movement and everyone being happy and peaceful. And so he makes a case for fetching and for being able to be honest and complain, not overdo it again, the middle road, but being honest, being human, standing firm in our humanity. And I just think this is wonderful Torah portion. I love the reminder of that. So that's all.
Thank you. Thank you so much
Yep.
for bringing that in. That's beautiful.
Yeah, thanks. You're welcome.
I know we've already brought up the Akedah a little bit, and of course, Rabbi Gubitz had something to say in relation to that. Does anyone want to read this piece?
Well,
Michael, would you like to? And then, yeah.
yes. Okay. Rabbinic sages teach that after the trauma of the Akedah and then his mother's Sarah's death, Isaac took a long leave of absence from his family. In the Torah text, we hear about him, but we barely hear a word from him. Some commentators actually suggest this silence was a permanent and final departure, that the trauma was so painful that he died of fear. Others imagine he was blinded. Other commentaries envision that it was neither death nor illness, but rather that Isaac's departure was a multifaceted journey of resilience and recovery. Bereshit Rabbah teaches that after the Akedah, Isaac went to study in a Beit Midrash, a house of learning, drowning his sorrows and his past in the books and traditions of our people. He immersed in a community of learners and seekers.
And that goes back to what Marla had mentioned earlier on with how he responded to really a horrific, traumatic event. In the book, Rabbi Gubitz also included a midrash about a conversation like being had with Hagar, I believe it was, showing his strength and his coming back to her after all those years, and her asking, like, what happens? Like, how did you get past all of this? How did you make it through? How are you as strong as you are today? And him being able to give some of these responses, perhaps through learning, perhaps through something else. And so I think those questions also have come up a lot during the pandemic, right? How many times did we ask of ourselves and of one another, where are your sources of strength? What are the things, the outlets that you go to in order to find some even footing when the world outside is really unpredictable and difficult?
Rabbi Cassi, what
Yeah.
is, I don't know if I forgot or what, but, or I wasn't paying attention, but what is the severe trauma that he went through, Isaac?
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you asked that question. So do you remember the story of the Akedah? God called to Abraham and
To
told him to
sacrifice.
bring, to sacrifice him.
The
That's exactly
sacrifice,
what
of
it is.
course, of course.
Yeah, so laying on the altar, Abraham having a knife over him.
Okay.
I would call that pretty traumatic.
Yes, I remember, of course I know that, but I thought, but does he remember that? I guess he does.
Well,
I didn't
there's
know if he was
also
was he a baby when that happens?
Oh, he
so
was 30
phenomenal
years old.
question. No,
Yeah.
it's not so clear, Larry. There's actually tons of commentary about how old he was, right?
Mhm.
2 Jews, 3 opinions. In this case, probably more like 10 opinions. There's a lot of different ideas about, was he a young child? He obviously was old enough that he was able to walk up the mountain himself while carrying things on his back.
Mhm.
Right? While carrying the wood that would be used. I mean, that's pretty horrific in its own right. But so he was old enough for that. Some commentaries show that he really was a man at this point, and some that he was a fairly young boy, and we really don't know which. And of course, that makes a huge difference. But according to this, he definitely was, I mean, according to really the text in general, he definitely was old enough to remember.
Okay, because somehow I envision him as much younger and maybe not having a recollection, but okay, so this is the trauma that they're addressing. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to say something that where it says some commentators actually suggest the sound that wait a minute that Isaac died of fear or that he was blinded. You know what? I really totally can't go along with that because the fact that Abraham was so enamored and devoted to God that he wanted to sacrifice his son, and it took the angels of God to say, no, don't do that. It would seem to me that the beauty of life of Isaac, just for Isaac to live, that would be the commandment for him to live a life. Okay, it could be in the study of Torah or whatever it would be, but not that he would, shrink and die of fear or become blind. That would be sort of like against the idea of living a full life and study and belief in God. I mean, I think that was the message of the angel that prevented his death by sacrifice. So this stuff over here, it just goes against what I feel was the purpose of saving him.
Yeah, so Michael, just to speak to that briefly.
Okay.
The idea that Isaac was killed is actually a very old idea. And the rabbis had the same discomfort with it that you do. And so the way that they did editing at this point in terms of everything. Like every single tradition and thought is maintained, even if they contradict one another. So that mode of thought is still within our like Jewish literature as a whole. But obviously the way the Torah is written, that doesn't happen, because he has children, he has a future and everything like that. And how could he possibly have given birth to the Jewish people if Isaac, his son, was killed, right? But there is this ancient belief that does contradict that.
I have two comments. One is, we don't. Is there anything, or is there a lot of midrash about Abraham after this event? I mean, he had gone through trauma too, and we don't focus on him. And the other thing, Michael, about what you were saying, in primitive society, if someone thought that a curse was placed on them, they would just lie, especially in Africa where I read about this, they would just lie down and just will themselves dead, and they died. They just felt that they had no other recourse but just to lie down and die. So it's what was talked about here didn't sound that unreasonable.
Yeah, thank you, Art, for bringing that in. And you're right, Abraham is another really interesting avenue to go down. So is Hagar. So like all of them, from their viewpoints, all of this stuff, there's so many other levels. Frank, I saw that you had something you wanted to say.
I do. What I really enjoy in this is we're talking at the end where he says, drowning in sorrows in his past, in the books, traditions of our people, he immersed himself in a community. Like he went into action. Like he started doing stuff. He didn't just sit around and go, oh my God, my dad tried to kill me. What's up? Like I must be a horrible person. Like he didn't sit in self-pity or he just got on with action and did stuff. He got into a community of people that wanted to learn and seek, because he must knew God has me here for a purpose. If he didn't have me killed, I must be here for a reason. So let me find out what that reason is. And I think that's what kind of gets him through and also sharing, right? It says in his recovery, he's probably shared what he's gone through. He probably shared with others about his trauma, how he's getting through it. So that's what I liked about the end of this right here.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a lot of power in that, right? That it's important to focus, just like you were saying, Shelley, but that we shouldn't get too far down that path because it's ultimately not so helpful. So I want to bring us into something that was discussed within the commentary, but not necessarily with these texts. And that's the idea of the wells of this particular area of water that we'll talk to, that appears in 3 different times within these Torah portions. The first of them, where is it? Yeah, so it's Ber Lahai Roi, right? This body of water that's mentioned in lots of different places as kind of this source of strength. And it appears 3 times very close to one another. So the first one has to do with Hagar, that we remember when Sarai was feeling really kind of upset because Hagar was having a child with Abraham and she was not. This is when she was pregnant. She hadn't even had the child yet when this came up. So Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? God said. And she said, I'm running away from my mistress Sarai. And the angel of God said to her, go back to your mistress and submit to her harsh treatment. And the angel of God said to her, I will greatly increase your offspring, and they shall be too many to count. The angel of God said to her, behold, you are with child and shall bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael, for the Eternal has paid heed to your suffering. He shall be a wild ass of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against his. Doesn't sound like such a blessing, does it? He shall dwell alongside all of his kinsmen. And she called the Eternal who spoke to her, you are El Roy, by which she meant, have I not gone on seeing after he saw me? Therefore, the well was called Be'er Lahai Roi. It is between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar bore a son to Abraham, and that son, of course, is Ishmael. So the very first time we see Be'er Lahai Roi, it comes from the Hebrew root ra'ah, which means to see or to be seen. That's its very first context. And there's two other times where it appears close together, and I think these were talked about a little bit more. So when Hagar was in need of some support, that's the first time. The second time, Isaac had just come back from the vicinity of Be'er Lahai Roi, for he was settled in the region of the Negev. And Isaac went out walking in the field toward evening and looked up and he saw the camels approaching. Walking in the fields is a reference to prayer. That's what the rabbis say. Raising her eyes, Rebekah saw Isaac. She alighted from the camel and said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field toward us?" I'm going to stop right there. So what happened before this? Isaac was mourning because his mother had just died. And so where does he go? He goes to Be'er Lahai Roi, seeking comfort, seeking support, seeking the wells of Jewish tradition, some of the mystics say. And then what ends up happening afterwards, he meets the love of his life, Rebekah. That's the second time it appears. And the third time, Abraham breathed his last. So Abraham dies, dying at a good, ripe age, old and contented, and he was gathered to his kin. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah and the field of Ephron, son of Zahor, the Hittite, facing Mamre, the fields that Abraham had bought from the Hittites, where Abraham was buried. So it's kind of bringing full picture, because at the beginning of the Torah portion, he buys that plot of land for Sarah, and now he's buried in it. And Sarah, his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac settled near Be'er Lahai Roi. So after the death of his father, he settles again in Be'er Lahai Roi. Just going to bring in the commentary that Rabbi Gubitz brought in about this, and then we could talk about it a little bit more. Yeah, sorry, do you have a
So
question?
is that just a metaphor for,
Yes.
the well of spirit, going back to the, is that what the worship and spiritual being and all of that?
Yeah, he's going back to this place of comfort. The mystics, there's a lot of talk of like water, wells of water within the mystical tradition. And so there's a ton that's spoken about this there. I didn't bring in much of that at all. But that's one of the ideas. That doesn't mean that's the only idea. We can have tons of ideas about what this means. So I'm just going to read this really quick piece that Rabbi Gubitz wrote. Isaac's development of equanimity does not smooth over his past experiences or lead him to a future without pain, trial, or suffering. Rather, it is the practice of the midah of equanimity as a constant journey and spiritual exercise that brings understanding and even peace. For Isaac, his return again and again to Be'er Lahai Roi may be imagined not just as a pilgrimage to a place where God can see him, but a journey to where he can see himself. In a place he develops clarity as an inner witness to his life experience. It's powerful wording, isn't it? Right there, like that he not only is God able to see him, Be'er Lahai Roi, a place where one is seen by God, right? God speaks in all of those different places, but a journey where he can see himself and be witness to his life experience. What do you think that word witness means in this case? What does it mean to witness one's life experience?
I guess to kind of understand, to go really deep within yourself and try to understand what is happening around you, to get in touch with your feeling and what's going on and what has transpired, that has brought you to this place.
Beautiful.
It reminds me of a young person that I saw recently at the hospital who was in the 20s and had cancer. And he was there for a treatment of another thing that was happening with the cancers, plural. And I always ask patients, where they, do they belong to a religion? Do they believe in God? This particular person's comment was, God has my back. And I always remember that. God has my back. It was, I thought, wow.
I get the feeling from the way this is all written and come and explained is that this was, and I'm not a psychologist or hadn't had any training in that regard, but it's this, I think the author had in mind to provide a therapy kind of statement here for people to help people through trauma.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's about improving ourselves and getting what we need in order to be our whole selves.
This happened and moving forward. That's how I'd say clarity as an inner witness. He's the only one who can really know how he feels inside and what really, really happened to him from his point of view. But to accept that it is one of his life experiences, and it's almost like he becomes meditative. And we've talked about this a lot in the last year and a half. It's like, what can I learn from this? How can I move forward? How can I contend with it? You don't erase it. But what can I learn? Yeah.
And Rabbi Catherine, I'm sure you've had similar experiences to me in this route. And I know that there's some people who do have who do have a training in terms of therapy and psychology and stuff like that I do not. But my experience in counseling families who have gone through devastating losses is that the families who can't accept what happened are the ones that suffer the most. And the families that are able to accept it and to try to make meaning from it are the ones that are the healthiest and that are able to move forward in a positive way.
It's also you switch some of your energy to doing something.
Yeah, exactly.
Shelley,
Shelley, did you want to say something? I saw you going for the unmute. I know it's hard to get to it.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Well, I love the part where just a little bit before Isaac looking at himself or witnessing himself, the part where Hagar was told to go back to Sarah, where she doesn't feel that she's being taken care of. Go back into the trauma. Basically, what's being said is face it. Take a look at it. And I think it kind of hinges on what you were talking about with trauma and working with families that have gone through traumatic experiences. Those of us that witness or that look at it, the way over grief is through it, really. And trauma, you have to go back into it. And it's the hardest thing to do. But I think it's the most holy thing really to do and the most helpful thing for all of us. And I just love that part. That'll stick with me. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you so much for adding that extra layer to that. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. You're welcome.
Frank, did you have something that you wanted to say also? No? Okay, I wasn't sure if I saw your hand go up. Alan Marinis here says something kind of similar to what we just read of just when you have a strong inner witness, outer influences are seen for what they are. And that will help you to keep from being infected by sentiments that swirl around you. That same inner faculty also keeps you from being pushed around by the forces that arise within you. The distanced witness is not susceptible to the tides of doubt or temptation or jealousy that wash through the interior world. Do we still face real struggles? Yes. Do the consequences matter? Yes. Do we still feel the rage of human emotions and drives? Yes. In other words, every aspect of your current life is real and important. You would be wise to embrace it because it's your curriculum. And he talks about this idea of curriculum, that all of us have a soul curriculum. All of us have specific areas that we are working on. And so the same issues arise again and again and again and again until we're able to kind of move through them. But cultivate the witness who will make you the master of the inner realm and not the victim. Let's not throw up our hands and give into it. Let's keep working through it to go back to that trauma. All right, I'm going to skip some of this stuff, even though I love these quotes here. And I encourage you to go back to them because I want to end, and I'm looking at the time, with this piece that Greg Marcus wrote. I'm just going to read it really, really fast. So with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th of the deciding game of the 2012 World Series, the count went to 2 strikes. My brain started racing. 1 more strike and the Giants are going to win. Wow, that would be their 2nd World Series. There will be another parade. I found myself getting more and more excited. Then I started to get anxious. If they lose today, they could go on and lose the whole series. At the time I was practicing equanimity, out of the blue, I realized that the more my mind was racing off into the possible future, the less I was paying attention to the game. I made a conscious effort not to go down that road of becoming super excited. I took a deep breath and was able to be calm and remain in the moment. When Sergio Romo, sorry, I don't know these names, so if I'm mispronouncing, forgive me, I'm not a baseball person. The Giants relief pitcher threw a fastball instead of a slider and struck out Cabrera. I was still super happy and excited. However, I did not have an overlay of that super franticness. I was much calmer, and I remember the moment with a richness that I might not have if I had allowed my adrenaline free rein. In the following month, I noticed that things that would have brought me down didn't have that effect on me that I anticipated they would. By limiting my reactions to positive experiences, I strengthened my soul and made it resilient to the downs that came later. I know I'm bringing in the Giants sore subject, sorry. But I think that there is a lot of power in that particular kind of tangible experience.
My family recently reminded me that I have a mantra and it goes like, don't get excited. And I recently got a gift mug and they had put that on the mug for me. Don't get excited. But I look back at that and I didn't even realize that through our lives that it was noticed that I would use that technique when family issues came up or whatever outside the family.
Oh, nice.
Don't get excited.
Remember said 18.
Yeah, or at least in moderation, right?
Right.
Some excitement isn't a bad thing.
Oh,
But we can work ourselves up, can't we?
Right.
I was just thinking before you said it, Rabbi Cassi, some excitement is a good thing. Like my son is coming from New York this afternoon, and I'm so excited to see him. So some excitements are okay.
Right. My husband is going away on a work trip for the first time since this pandemic began. And he got tickets because his client is doing something at a jazz club that my in-laws love. And he got them tickets to go to the jazz club. And they were so excited. They're like, yes, sign me up. And 30 minutes later, they called back and said, actually, we don't feel comfortable going to a jazz club. But they were so excited in that moment that they said yes immediately and thought about it after. And it made me think of exactly this, right? Like excitement is a really good thing. But we also have to let ourselves think about things. So there weren't questions at the end of this particular drash that there are usually in this book, the Musar commentary. And so I'm just going to kind of leave with an overall question of what are your takeaways from this portion and from our discussion about equanimity?
Rabbi, this reminds me of what Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics for, which is describing we have 2 systems operating in our brain. He called them system 1 and system 2. And system 1 is the one that gets you excited and you make snap decisions, often wrong. And the system 2 is the thoughtful, reflective one where you pull back and you bring in data to inform yourself with, am I making the right decisions? And you are calm and you experience equanimity. So that reminded me.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica.
To me, this is like everything in moderation. I think the Greeks might have said something like this, and not too excited or not too complacent, just. So, I mean, as Irv was saying before, if I get cut off by someone on the freeway, I think, what a jerk that guy is, but I don't really get angry about it because I don't really care. I just, it's not that, it doesn't make me angry, this other person's ignorance of doing such a thing. But anyway, it's all about moderation.
I think
oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay. You can go.
Well, and also just to pause and to think things through. You have the time. It's okay. You don't have to react immediately. And it saves you energy, really, in the long run to accomplish other things that you do need to take care of.
Beautiful. Yes, Shelley.
I was just thinking about balance, that if we, don't walk the center way, the middle way, that we're going to lose our balance, and that we'll be out of balance. And we know when we are, we can feel that energy that comes with getting overly excited and then being worried that the good thing that's happening is going to be taken away. And the same with getting so sorrowful or depressed about something bad. And we know that if we just stay in the middle, that we will keep our balance. I think it's just about keeping our balance, being able to walk upright. So,
yeah. Around this particular midah, and there's a reflection I included in my text sheet that we didn't talk about today. But around all the midot, this is true, but I think especially on this one, this idea of the importance of meditation, of taking moments to allow ourselves to be, fully focused and to have the big picture so that we don't allow our emotions and things in our lives to allow ourselves to become a victim to those things, but rather to be in control, as Alan Marinas said. So I know there is so much more to be said on all of this, and I'm just grateful for all of your wisdom and thoughts and questions and comments, and excited to continue this journey through the Midot with all of you next week. So thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right.